Arizona Territory, 1883. The unrelenting sun beat down on the hardened dirt of Copper Creek, a town that existed only because men believed there was fortune to be made from the surrounding hills. Adelaide Buchanan, the town's new schoolteacher, watched the desert heat create shimmering waves above the dusty Main Street as she stood on the boardwalk outside Jennings' General Store. At 22 years old, with her chestnut brown hair pinned neatly beneath a modest bonnet and wearing a pale blue cotton dress that had seen better days, Adelaide clutched the eviction notice in her trembling hand. "Miss Buchanan," Mrs. Jennings called from the store doorway. "Are you quite all right, dear? You've gone white as a sheet." Adelaide composed herself, straightening her shoulders despite the weight pressing down on them. "Perfectly fine, thank you." The lie came easily after years of practice. No one needed to know that the town's schoolteacher had nowhere to sleep tonight, that the room she'd rented above the milliner's shop was being reclaimed for the owner's newly married daughter. She folded the notice and tucked it into her reticule. 6 months in Copper Creek had taught her that this mining town held little charity for a young woman alone. The boarding houses were full, and proper accommodations for unmarried ladies were scarce. The mining company owned most everything else, and they had no interest in housing teachers who encouraged miners' children to aspire beyond the copper pits. Adelaide walked briskly toward the schoolhouse, her one sanctuary. The modest wooden structure sat at the edge of town, its white paint peeling under the Arizona sun. Inside was the only place in Copper Creek where she felt purposeful, needed, but a schoolhouse was no home and night was approaching. "Miss Buchanan, wait up." She turned to see young Tommy Fisher running toward her, dust kicking up behind his worn boots. "I solved that arithmetic problem you gave me," he said proudly when he caught up, gasping for breath. Adelaide smiled. "Did you now? That was quite challenging." "Pa helped some, but I figured most of it myself." "I'm very proud of you, Tommy," she meant it. These children were why she'd come west after her parents' deaths left her alone in Philadelphia. Teaching was her calling, the frontier her opportunity. What she hadn't counted on was how the vast openness of the West would amplify her solitude rather than diminish it. "Pa says there's a cattle drive coming through tomorrow, hundreds of steers, and cowboys too." Tommy's eyes gleamed with excitement. "Is that so?" Adelaide replied, only half listening as she unlocked the schoolhouse door. "Ma says one of 'em owns half of Texas, drives his own cattle 'cause he likes to, not 'cause he has to." Adelaide nodded politely. "That sounds very interesting. Now you'd better run along home before your mother worries." After Tommy departed, she closed the door and leaned against it, letting her carefully maintained composure crumble. She had exactly $3.42 to her name and nowhere to sleep tonight. The territorial school board wouldn't send her next quarter's salary for 3 weeks. "You have your health, your education, and your dignity," she whispered, repeating her mother's mantra, but dignity provided poor shelter from the elements. Adelaide moved to her desk at the front of the room, running her fingers over the smooth, worn wood. Coming west had been an act of desperation as much as adventure. After her parents succumbed to influenza, leaving nothing but debts, the teaching position in Arizona Territory had seemed like providence. Now she wondered if it had been foolishness. The frontier was no place for a woman alone, that was the hard truth she'd learned. Out here you needed family, connections, or wealth to survive. She had none of these things. As dusk approached, she opened her reticule and removed the letter she'd started writing to her former headmistress back east. Perhaps there might be a position available in Philadelphia again. The thought of returning defeated made her stomach clench, but practical matters were becoming dire. The sudden thunder of hooves outside interrupted her thoughts. She moved to the window to see a small group of riders approaching the schoolhouse. Adelaide quickly tucked away her letter and smoothed her skirts, curious about visitors this late. The lead rider dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. He removed his hat, revealing sandy blonde hair and a face that was surprisingly youthful for a man who carried himself with such authority. He was perhaps 25, with a clean-shaven jaw that hinted at regular attention despite trail dust. Adelaide opened the door before he could knock, professional composure firmly back in place. "May I help you, sir?" The man smiled, and something in Adelaide's chest fluttered unexpectedly. "Grant Dawson, ma'am," he bowed slightly. "Pardon the intrusion. We're looking for the mayor or whoever might be in charge of this town." "Mayor Holloway is likely at the Silver Spur Saloon this time of day," she replied, noting the quality of his clothing, trail-worn but made of fine materials. "I'm Adelaide Buchanan, the schoolteacher." His blue eyes, bright against his sun-bronzed skin, assessed her with interest. A pleasure, Miss Buchanan. We're bringing a cattle drive through tomorrow. Customarily, I like to make arrangements with the town officials about water rights and grazing fees beforehand. That's very proper of you, Adelaide said, somewhat surprised. Most drovers simply passed through taking what they needed. Grant Dawson laughed, the sound warm and genuine. My father taught me that good business practices work even on the frontier, perhaps especially here. One of the other riders called out, Grant, we should get settled before dark. Of course, Grant replied, then turned back to Adelaide. Thank you for your assistance, Miss Buchanan. As he replaced his hat and mounted his horse, Adelaide felt a curious reluctance to see him go. She chided herself for such foolishness. Men like Grant Dawson, clearly prosperous, undoubtedly with connections throughout the territory, had no reason to give schoolteachers a second thought. She watched the riders head toward town, then closed the schoolhouse door. Night was falling, and she still had nowhere to go. With resignation, Adelaide prepared for a night on the hard wooden floor of the schoolhouse. She spread her shawl on the floorboards, creating a makeshift bed behind her desk where she wouldn't be visible from the windows. It wasn't the first time she'd slept here when circumstances demanded it, though she'd never spent an entire night. The thought of someone discovering her this way, reduced to such desperate measures, made her cheeks burn with shame. Lying in the darkness, she tried to think practically about her predicament. Perhaps she could speak to the mining company manager about temporary accommodations, or maybe one of her students' families might take her in until the next salary payment arrived. The thought of becoming an object of charity made her throat tighten. The frontier had taught Adelaide one lesson above all others: dependency was dangerous. People disappeared out here, died, moved on, abandoned responsibilities. Counting on others was a luxury she couldn't afford. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by memories of her parents' deaths and the creditors who'd circled afterward, stripping away everything familiar. When dawn's first light filtered through the schoolhouse windows, Adelaide rose stiffly, her body protesting the hard floor. She smoothed her rumpled dress as best she could and pinned up her hair, determined that no one would guess how she'd spent the night. She stepped outside to splash water on her face from the rain barrel, grateful that her students wouldn't arrive for several hours. The town was already stirring, unusual for so early in the morning. In the distance, she could see the dust cloud that signaled the approaching cattle drive. After washing up, Adelaide returned to the schoolhouse to prepare the day's lessons. She was writing on the blackboard when a knock at the door startled her. Grant Dawson stood on the threshold, looking even more handsome in the morning light than he had the previous evening. Beside him was a young boy of perhaps 9 or 10 years. Miss Buchanan, I hope I'm not disturbing you, Grant said, hat in hand. This is my nephew Henry. His mother, my sister, passed last winter and he's been traveling with me since. I was hoping he might sit in on your classes while we're in town. Adelaide's teacher instincts immediately overtook any other considerations. She smiled warmly at the boy, whose solemn expression and downcast eyes spoke of recent grief. Of course he's welcome, she said. We're studying American history and working on multiplication tables today, Henry. Do you enjoy those subjects? The boy glanced up briefly, then back down at his boots. Yes, ma'am. Wonderful. The other children will be here in about an hour. You're welcome to help me prepare if you'd like. Grant placed a hand on his nephew's shoulder. That's very kind of you, Miss Buchanan. I've brought his books and writing materials. He handed Adelaide a leather satchel. We'll be in town for about a week, getting supplies and resting the herd before pushing on to California. Adelaide nodded, noticing the quality of Henry's clothing and the well-used but expensive books in the satchel. Grant Dawson was clearly a man of means who valued education. A week of consistent schooling will do him good, she said. Children thrive on routine, especially after difficult changes. Something in Grant's expression shifted, a recognition passing between them. Yes, they do. Thank you for understanding. After Grant departed, promising to return at the end of the school day, Henry remained standing awkwardly by the door. Would you like to help me prepare the readers for today's lesson? Adelaide asked gently. Henry nodded and followed her to the book cabinet. As they worked together, he gradually began to open up. Uncle Grant reads to me every night, he said as they distributed the McGuffey readers, even when we're on the trail. The other cowboys think it's funny. I think it's wonderful, Adelaide replied. Your uncle seems like a very thoughtful man. He owns the biggest ranch in West Texas, Henry said with a hint of pride breaking through his melancholy. 20,000 acres and more cattle than anyone can count, but he still drives the herds himself, says a man should know every part of his business. Adelaide smiled at the boy's obvious admiration for his uncle. That's a wise philosophy. He says my ma would want me to get educated proper so I can run the ranch someday if I want to. Henry's voice grew quieter. I miss her something awful. Adelaide knelt beside him, her heart aching for this child who carried such grief. I lost my parents recently too. It hurts in a way nothing else does. Henry looked at her with sudden interest. Does it ever stop hurting? Not entirely, she admitted, but it changes. The good memories become stronger than the sadness, eventually. By the time the other children arrived, Henry had claimed a desk near the front and was more animated. Throughout the day, Adelaide noticed how quickly he grasped new concepts, his intelligence evident despite gaps in his formal education. When the school day ended, she found herself watching the door, anticipating Grant's arrival. She scolded herself for such schoolgirl behavior, but couldn't deny the flutter of expectation she felt. Grant arrived precisely at dismissal time, his tall figure filling the doorway as the children filed out. Several boys stopped to gawk at the genuine cowboy in their midst, peppering him with questions about his horses and guns. He answered them patiently before making his way to Adelaide's desk, where Henry was showing her a map he'd drawn. Did he behave himself? Grant asked, smiling as Henry gathered his things. Perfectly. He's quite bright, Adelaide replied. You should be very proud. His mother was the smart one in our family, Grant said, a shadow crossing his features. I'm just trying to honor her wishes the best I can. Uncle Grant, Miss Buchanan lost her parents too, Henry announced. She says the hurt changes into good memories eventually. Grant's gaze met Adelaide's, something unspoken passing between them. That's very true, though the journey there can be long. Adelaide nodded, suddenly aware of how intensely he was looking at her, as if truly seeing her for the first time. Self-consciousness swept through her as she remembered her rumpled dress and the dark circles that must be visible beneath her eyes after her night on the schoolhouse floor. We won't keep you any longer, Grant said, seeming to sense her discomfort. Thank you again for accommodating Henry on such short notice. As they turned to leave, Adelaide was struck by a sudden pang of loneliness, so acute it nearly took her breath away. The prospect of another night in the empty schoolhouse stretched before her like a vast desert. Miss Buchanan, Grant had paused at the door, the ladies of the town are hosting a dinner for our trail crew tonight at the church. As a community leader, your presence would be welcome, around 6 o'clock if you're available. Adelaide hesitated only briefly. That's very kind, I would be happy to attend. After they left, she sat at her desk, heart racing inexplicably. A community dinner meant she could delay returning to the schoolhouse until late evening. It also meant food, which was becoming a pressing concern as her supplies dwindled. At 5:30, Adelaide walked to the small clapboard church at the edge of town. She had washed her face and hands in the rain barrel behind the schoolhouse and pinned her hair more carefully, but she couldn't escape the fact that she was wearing the same dress as yesterday. The churchyard was filled with trestle tables laden with food. Women bustled about, setting out dishes and directing the placement of benches, while men stood in clusters, eyeing the cowboys with the wary respect frontier towns afforded to visitors who would soon depart. Mayor Holloway intercepted Adelaide as she approached. Miss Buchanan, excellent timing. These cattle fellows have offered to donate quite generously to our school fund. Perhaps you could express our gratitude. Before she could respond, he was steering her toward Grant Dawson, who stood conversing with the minister and several town elders. Grant looked up as they approached, and his smile sent an unexpected warmth through Adelaide's chest. Miss Buchanan, I was just telling these gentlemen about your excellent work with Henry today, Grant said. He hasn't been this enthusiastic about learning since before his mother's passing. He's a joy to teach, she replied truthfully, very quick-minded. The conversation flowed easily as Grant explained his cattle operation to the town officials. Adelaide found herself captivated by his intelligence and the respectful way he addressed everyone, from the mayor to the young boy who brought him coffee. Unlike many wealthy men she'd encountered, he wore his success lightly, without arrogance. As the dinner progressed, Grant made his way to Adelaide's side several times, asking thoughtful questions about her teaching methods and the needs of the school. Each time he approached, she felt increasingly aware of her appearance and circumstances, certain he must notice her worn dress and fatigued state. The sun was setting when Henry appeared at her elbow. Miss Buchanan, Uncle Grant wants to know if you'd like to see our camp. It's just beyond the creek, and we've got real chuck wagon coffee. Adelaide glanced around, noticing most townspeople were beginning to depart. The prospect of returning to the empty schoolhouse pressed on her like a physical weight. I would enjoy that very much, Henry, she said, making a quick decision. If your uncle is certain it wouldn't be an imposition. Grant himself appeared a moment later. Not an imposition at all. Our cook Joaquin makes coffee that's worth the walk, though I should warn you our camp is somewhat rustic. Adelaide nearly laughed at the irony. After sleeping on a schoolhouse floor, a cattle drive camp seemed positively luxurious. The walk to the camp was pleasant in the cooling evening air. Grant pointed out constellations to Henry as they walked, his deep voice gentle as he explained the stars that guided travelers across the vast western territories. The camp itself was orderly and well-established, with a large chuck wagon at its center and cowboys gathered around several campfires. Adelaide noted that despite the rough surroundings, there was a clear hierarchy and organization that spoke of Grant's leadership. Joaquin, Grant called to a barrel-chested man tending a large pot over the main fire. Our guest would like to sample your famous coffee. The cook grinned broadly. The best this side of the Mississippi, señorita. And perhaps you would honor us by trying my sourdough biscuits as well. Adelaide accepted both gratefully, realizing she'd eaten very little at the church dinner, too conscious of the townspeople watching her. The coffee was indeed excellent, strong and aromatic, while the biscuits melted in her mouth. These are remarkable, she told Joaquin, whose smile widened at the compliment. As they sat by the fire, Henry nestled between them. Grant told stories of life on his ranch in West Texas, painting pictures with words of vast grasslands and spectacular sunsets. Adelaide found herself sharing tales of her own childhood in Philadelphia, of her father's bookshop where she'd first fallen in love with learning. "And what brought you to Copper Creek?" Grant asked, pouring her more coffee. "It's rather remote for someone accustomed to city life." Adelaide hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. "After my parents died, there were financial difficulties. Teaching positions in the East are highly competitive, and the territorial school board was recruiting educators willing to come west." Grant nodded thoughtfully. "It takes courage to make such a journey alone." "Or desperation," she replied with more honesty than she'd intended, immediately regretting the admission. His blue eyes studied her face in the firelight. "I've found that courage and necessity often walk hand in hand on the frontier." Henry had dozed off against Grant's shoulder, the day's excitement finally catching up with him. Grant shifted him gently. "I should get him to bed," he said, standing carefully with the sleeping child in his arms. "Let me walk you back to town first." Adelaide felt panic rise in her throat. "That's not necessary, I can find my way." "I insist." "It's not proper for you to walk back alone after dark." She had no reasonable argument against this logic, so she followed him as he carried Henry to a large tent set slightly apart from the others. After placing the boy on a cot inside, Grant rejoined her. They walked in companionable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. "Henry told me something concerning today. He said you mentioned losing your parents recently, but he also got the impression you might be facing some difficulties." Adelaide's steps faltered. Children often misinterpret adult conversations. "Perhaps," Grant conceded, "but I've noticed you seem, forgive me for being forward, but you appear fatigued, and I believe you're wearing the same dress as yesterday." Heat rushed to Adelaide's face, mortification rendering her momentarily speechless. When she finally found her voice, it was thin with suppressed emotion. "Mr. Dawson, while I appreciate your concern, my personal circumstances are not appropriate topics for discussion." He stopped walking, turning to face her in the moonlight. "Miss Buchanan, I've offended you, and that was not my intention. Please accept my apology." The sincerity in his voice deflated her defensive anger. Apology accepted. They continued walking, the lights of Copper Creek now visible in the distance. Adelaide felt the weight of her predicament pressing down more heavily with each step closer to town. "I should tell you," Grant said carefully, "that Henry has taken a strong liking to you. He asked if you might continue teaching him while we're in town." "Of course," she replied, relieved by the change in subject. "He's welcome in my classroom for as long as you're here." They had reached the edge of town when Grant spoke again. "Miss Buchanan, may I ask where you reside? I would feel better seeing you safely to your door." The question she had dreaded. Adelaide stopped walking, her mind racing for a plausible explanation. That's very gentlemanly but unnecessary. My lodgings are quite close to the schoolhouse. Grant's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes told her he wasn't convinced. Then I'll walk you to the schoolhouse. When they reached the small building, Adelaide stood awkwardly at the door, hoping he would simply bid her good night and leave. Instead, he studied the darkened windows with a frown. Do you have a lantern I could light for you before I go? That won't be necessary, she said quickly. I know my way around quite well. His frown deepened. Miss Buchanan, forgive me for being presumptuous, but are your lodgings actually nearby? Adelaide felt tears threatening and fought them back fiercely. Mr. Dawson, I appreciate your escort, but I really must insist that you leave now. Adelaide, he said softly, using her given name for the first time, are you planning to sleep in the schoolhouse tonight? The gentle concern in his voice broke something inside her. A single tear escaped before she could stop it. My room above the milliner's shop has been reclaimed for the owner's daughter, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I have nowhere else until my next salary arrives. How long have you been sleeping here? Just last night, she said. I'm perfectly fine, this is a temporary situation. Grant's expression shifted from concern to determination. This won't do, there's a respectable boarding house in town, isn't there? Mrs. Sullivan's, but she's full, everyone is. The mining company brought in new workers last month, and accommodations are scarce. He considered this for a moment. There's a hotel in Bisbee about 20 miles south. I have business there tomorrow anyway. You could accompany us, find proper lodgings until your situation improves. Adelaide shook her head. I have school to teach, I can't abandon my students. And they can't expect their teacher to sleep on a schoolhouse floor, Grant countered. There must be someone in town who could help, the minister's wife, perhaps. I won't become an object of charity, Adelaide said firmly, her pride reasserting itself. I've managed on my own since my parents died, and I will continue to do so. Grant studied her face in the moonlight, his expression unreadable. Independence is admirable, Miss Buchanan, but there's no virtue in unnecessary suffering. Sometimes accepting help is the stronger choice. His words struck a chord she wasn't prepared for. Adelaide turned away, unable to meet his gaze as tears threatened again. I should go inside, she said, her voice unsteady. At least take this, Grant said, shrugging out of his coat and draping it over her shoulders. The nights get cold even in summer. The warmth of the garment enveloped her, along with the scent of leather, coffee, and something uniquely him. It was more kindness than she'd experienced in months, and it nearly undid her composure entirely. Thank you, she whispered. I'll return in the morning with Henry, he said. Perhaps by then we can find a better solution. After he left, Adelaide entered the dark schoolhouse, wrapping his coat more tightly around her. She should have refused it, accepting personal items from a man she barely knew violated every rule of propriety. But tonight, propriety seemed a distant concern compared to basic comfort. She laid out her makeshift bed behind the desk, using Grant's coat as both pillow and blanket. Despite her circumstances, she fell asleep more quickly than the night before, soothed by the lingering scent of cedar and leather. Adelaide woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the distant sound of hoofbeats. She rose quickly, folding Grant's coat and smoothing her rumpled clothing as best she could. After washing at the rain barrel and pinning up her hair, she felt marginally more presentable. She was arranging books on the students' desks when a knock sounded at the door. Grant stood there with Henry, but also with a basket that emitted delicious aromas. Joaquin insisted we bring you breakfast, Grant explained, setting the basket on her desk. He takes it personally when people miss his morning cooking. Adelaide's stomach growled audibly at the smell of fresh biscuits and bacon. She blushed, but Grant pretended not to notice. Henry, why don't you start on your reading while I speak with Miss Buchanan outside for a moment? Once they were alone on the schoolhouse steps, Grant handed her a folded piece of paper. I've spoken with Mrs. Sullivan at the boarding house. There's been a cancellation, and she can offer you a room starting tonight. Adelaide stared at the note, which confirmed this arrangement. How did you manage this? One of the mining company clerks is joining our cattle drive as far as Bisbee. He's vacating his room today. I can't afford Mrs. Sullivan's rates, Adelaide admitted. Not until the school board sends my next payment. It's already settled for the month, Grant said. Consider it an advance on the special tutoring you're providing Henry. Adelaide wanted to refuse, to insist she couldn't accept such charity, but the thought of another night on the hard schoolhouse floor weakened her resolve. I will repay you when my salary arrives. If that makes you more comfortable, though it's unnecessary. His blue eyes held her steadily. Henry needs the stability of consistent education right now, and you need proper accommodations. This arrangement benefits us both. There was logic in his argument that appeased her pride somewhat. Thank you, Mr. Dawson, your kindness is unexpected. Grant, he corrected gently. And kindness shouldn't be unexpected, even on the frontier. As he turned to go back inside, Adelaide noticed something she'd missed before, a small scar that curved along his jawline, visible only in the morning light. It was the only imperfection on his handsome face, a reminder that even this seemingly charmed life had seen its share of hardship. The school day passed in a blur of activity. Word had spread that the famous Texas cattleman's nephew was attending their small school, and Adelaide's classroom was unusually full as children, who sometimes skipped lessons, appeared with washed faces and combed hair. Grant returned at the end of the day, this time with a wagon. I thought you might appreciate transportation to the boarding house for your belongings, he explained. Adelaide felt a flush of embarrassment. I have very little to move. Just a trunk at the milliner's shop. If Grant was surprised by this admission, he didn't show it. He simply helped her onto the wagon seat and drove to the milliner's, where he carried her small trunk out with ease. The shop owner watched from the doorway with poorly concealed curiosity. People will talk, Adelaide murmured as they headed toward Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house. People always do, Grant replied with a shrug, especially in small towns. Does that concern you? A teacher's reputation is her most valuable asset, she said, especially an unmarried female teacher. Grant nodded thoughtfully. I understand. Would it help if Henry accompanies us from now on? A chaperone of sorts, even if he is only 9. The suggestion was both practical and considerate. Yes, that would be appropriate. Mrs. Sullivan greeted them at the boarding house door, her expression a mixture of curiosity and respect. Grant's reputation had clearly preceded him. Your room is ready, Miss Buchanan, she said, leading them inside. It's our best available with a view of the mountains. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small writing desk. After 2 nights on the schoolhouse floor, it looked like paradise to Adelaide. This is perfect, she said sincerely. Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. After the older woman left, Grant set Adelaide's trunk at the foot of the bed. I'll leave you to get settled. Henry and I will return for dinner if that's acceptable. Mrs. Sullivan serves at 6. Alone in her new room, Adelaide unpacked her meager belongings. 3 dresses besides the one she wore, a nightgown, undergarments, a hairbrush, and a small wooden box containing her parents' wedding rings and a daguerreotype of them on their wedding day. It took less than 10 minutes to arrange everything. She washed thoroughly with the basin and pitcher provided, changed into her second-best dress, a forest green cotton with white collar and cuffs, and brushed her hair until it shone before repinning it in a more flattering style than her usual severe knot. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she hardly recognized herself. There was color in her cheeks and a brightness in her eyes that had been absent for months. She told herself it was simply the relief of having proper accommodations again, nothing to do with the prospect of dining with Grant Dawson. At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock sounded at her door. Grant and Henry stood in the hallway, both freshly washed and wearing clean shirts. Joaquin threatened to quit if we showed up to a proper dinner looking like we'd been dragged behind the chuck wagon, Grant explained with a grin. Mrs. Sullivan's dining room was occupied by 6 other boarders, all men employed by the mining company. They fell silent when Adelaide entered with Grant and Henry, their curious gazes following the trio to a table by the window. Dinner was simple but abundant: roast beef, potatoes, green beans, and fresh bread. Adelaide realized how long it had been since she'd eaten a proper meal as the flavors exploded on her tongue. She forced herself to eat slowly, conscious of Grant's presence across the table. Conversation flowed easily between them, centered mostly on Henry's experiences at school and Grant's cattle business. Adelaide found herself laughing more than she had in months, as Grant recounted tales of his early days learning to drive cattle. I was thrown from my horse 17 times on my first cattle drive, he admitted. My father threatened to tie me to the saddle if it happened again. Did it? Adelaide asked, amused by the image of a younger, less composed Grant tumbling from his mount. Only twice more, he said with a wink at Henry, who giggled. By then I'd learned to anticipate when the horse was planning to object to my presence. As dinner concluded, Mrs. Sullivan approached their table with coffee and a meaningful look at Adelaide. Perhaps you and Mr. Dawson would enjoy coffee in the parlor. There's a fine view of the sunset. Henry could help me with dessert in the kitchen. The suggestion was transparent, Mrs. Sullivan was offering a chaperoned but semi-private setting for conversation. Adelaide hesitated, aware of the other boarders' watchful eyes. That would be lovely, Grant answered for them both. If Miss Buchanan agrees. In the parlor, they sat in straight-backed chairs positioned to maintain propriety while allowing conversation. Through the west-facing window, the sunset painted the distant mountains in shades of gold and crimson. I want to thank you again, Adelaide said, cradling her coffee cup. Your intervention today was most unexpected. Grant's expression grew serious. May I speak frankly, Miss Buchanan? Of course. When I realized your circumstances last night, I was deeply concerned. Not just for your physical comfort, but for your safety. A young woman alone without secure lodgings, the frontier can be unforgiving in such situations. Adelaide nodded, unable to dispute this reality. I've learned that lesson rather painfully since coming west. May I ask what your plans are, beyond waiting for your next salary, I mean? She hesitated, then decided honesty was warranted after his kindness. I've been considering returning east. Teaching positions are competitive, but perhaps my Western experience would be valued. I've started a letter to my former headmistress in Philadelphia. Grant absorbed this information, his expression unreadable. And is that what you want, to return east? What I want, Adelaide paused, considering, what I want is security. Stability, the chance to teach without wondering where I'll sleep or how I'll eat. The East offers institutions and structures that the frontier lacks. That's true, Grant acknowledged. Though the West offers opportunities that the East cannot match: land, freedom, the chance to build something new. For men, perhaps, Adelaide said with a hint of bitterness. For women alone, the West offers mainly hardship and vulnerability. Grant studied her face thoughtfully. There's truth in that, which makes the women who succeed here all the more remarkable. Their conversation was interrupted by Henry's return with a plate of apple tarts, his expression suggesting he'd already sampled at least one in the kitchen. The evening ended soon after, with Grant and Henry bidding her good night in the boarding house parlor under Mrs. Sullivan's watchful eye. We'll see you at school tomorrow, Grant said, his hand warm against hers as he helped her rise from her chair. Sleep well, Adelaide. For the first time in many nights, she did exactly that, the soft bed and clean sheets a luxury beyond measure after her recent hardships. The next morning, Adelaide arrived at the schoolhouse early, feeling refreshed and energized. She had just finished writing the day's lessons on the blackboard when a knock at the door announced Grant's arrival with Henry. Good morning, she greeted them, noticing immediately that something was different. Grant's expression was more serious than usual, a tension around his eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. Is everything all right? We received a telegram from my foreman in Texas, Grant explained after Henry had taken his seat. There's some trouble at the ranch that requires my attention. We'll need to leave the day after tomorrow, earlier than planned. Adelaide felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. I see, Henry will be missed in the classroom. He's grown quite attached to you, Grant said quietly. As have I, if I may be so bold. The directness of his statement caught her off guard. Mr. Dawson. Grant, he corrected gently. And I apologize if my candor is inappropriate, but our time is now limited, and I've never been one to leave important matters unaddressed. Adelaide's heart fluttered in her chest. What matters do you mean, exactly? I find myself reluctant to leave Copper Creek, despite urgent business calling me home. More specifically, I find myself reluctant to leave your company. The confession hung between them, sincere and unadorned. Adelaide struggled to formulate a response that acknowledged his sentiment without encouraging impropriety. That's very flattering, she began carefully, but we've known each other only a few days. True, Grant conceded. Yet I feel I've learned more about your character in those days than I might discover about another person in months. Your dignity in difficult circumstances, your dedication to teaching, your kindness toward Henry, these reveal the essentials of who you are. His assessment was so earnest, so lacking in artifice, that Adelaide found herself touched despite her caution. You're very perceptive. Not particularly, he said with a self-deprecating smile. just observant about things that matter, and I've observed that you're facing significant challenges here with limited support." Adelaide stiffened slightly. "I don't require rescue, Mr. Dawson." "Grant," he reminded her again, "and I wasn't suggesting rescue, merely acknowledging reality. You're a capable, intelligent woman making your way in difficult circumstances. That commands respect, not pity." His clarification eased her defensiveness somewhat. "Thank you for that distinction. Few people make it." "Would you allow me to write to you after we leave?" Grant asked. "I'd like to know how you're faring, and Henry would enjoy sending you his own letters to practice his penmanship." The request was reasonable, even proper with the inclusion of Henry's correspondence. "I would welcome letters from both of you." Grant's smile returned, warming his blue eyes. "Excellent, and perhaps when your school term ends, you might consider visiting our ranch before making any decisions about returning east. Texas offers a middle ground between Eastern institutions and frontier rawness." The invitation took her by surprise. "That's very generous, but I couldn't possibly." "It would be educational," Grant continued, "for Henry's sake. He needs a consistent teacher figure in his life, and he's responded to you more positively than anyone since his mother's passing." Adelaide recognized the strategy, framing the invitation in terms of Henry's needs rather than any personal interest. It was both considerate of her reputation and clever. "I'll consider it," she said finally, "though I make no promises." Grant's expression brightened. "That's all I ask. Now I should leave you to your teaching." "We'll see you at dinner." After he left, Adelaide found it difficult to concentrate on her lessons. Grant Dawson had entered her life like a sudden storm, disrupting the careful routines she'd established to survive on the frontier. His imminent departure should have been a relief, a return to normalcy, yet she felt only a hollow disappointment at the prospect. The school day passed in a blur, with Henry participating more actively than ever in lessons. When dismissal time arrived, Adelaide found herself watching the door, anticipating Grant's arrival with an eagerness that both thrilled and alarmed her. When he appeared, something in his expression immediately put her on alert. His usual easy confidence was replaced by a tense vigilance that reminded her he was a man accustomed to frontier dangers. "What's wrong?" she asked as soon as the last student had departed. "Probably nothing," Grant replied, though his tone contradicted his words. "There are some rough characters in town, not my men. They rode in this morning from the south." "Copper Creek often attracts drifters," Adelaide said. "The saloon and gambling hall bring them in." "These men aren't typical drifters." Grant's gaze moved to the window, scanning the street outside. "I recognize one of them from Texas. He has a reputation for violence." A chill ran down Adelaide's spine. "Should I be concerned?" "Not immediately," Grant said, his attention returning to her. "But I'd prefer if you, Henry, and I remain together until they move on." "Safety in numbers." Henry looked between them, sensing the tension. "Are the bad men looking for us, Uncle Grant?" Grant ruffled the boy's hair reassuringly. "No reason to think so, Henry. Just being cautious, that's all." They walked to the boarding house together, Grant's eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Adelaide found herself doing the same, newly aware of potential threats. The town suddenly seemed more menacing than it had that morning. At the boarding house, Mrs. Sullivan met them with obvious concern. "Miss Buchanan, Mr. Dawson, there were some rough men asking after you earlier." "I didn't tell them anything, of course." Grant's expression darkened. "What exactly did they ask?" "They wanted to know if a Texas cattleman was staying here, or if I knew where to find him. They seemed particularly interested when I mentioned you'd been dining with our new teacher." Adelaide felt Grant's hand at her elbow, steadying her as the implications registered. "Did they threaten you, Mrs. Sullivan?" "Not directly," the older woman said, "but there was meanness in their eyes. I've seen enough troublemakers in my years to recognize the type." Grant nodded grimly. "You were right not to tell them anything. If they return, maintain that position." In the dining room, Grant arranged their seating so that his back was to the wall and he could observe the entrance. The meal passed in tense silence, broken only by Henry's occasional questions about when they would leave for Texas. "Tomorrow," Grant said finally, "we'll depart at first light. The herd can follow under my foreman's direction." Adelaide looked up from her barely touched plate. "So soon?" "It's prudent," Grant said, his eyes meeting hers with regret. "I don't want to bring trouble to your town, and I need to get Henry away from potential danger." She nodded, understanding his priorities even as disappointment bloomed in her chest. Of course. Henry's safety must come first. After dinner, as they rose to retire to their rooms, Grant pulled Adelaide aside. I'd like to speak with you privately before we leave tomorrow. Would you meet me in the parlor at dawn? We'll be departing immediately after. Of course, she agreed, concern evident in her voice, but please be careful tonight. Grant's smile didn't reach his eyes, always. Adelaide slept poorly that night, her dreams troubled by shadowy figures and unspoken fears. She rose before dawn, washing and dressing with care in her best blue dress, which she'd saved for special occasions. If this was to be their goodbye, she wanted to leave Grant with a favorable impression. The parlor was empty when she arrived, the first gray light of dawn barely illuminating the room. She sat in one of the straight-backed chairs, hands folded in her lap, trying to calm her racing thoughts. The sound of boots on the wooden floor announced Grant's arrival. He entered the parlor with Henry at his side, both dressed for travel. Adelaide noticed immediately that Grant wore a gun belt, something she hadn't seen him do previously within the town limits. "Good morning," she said, rising to greet them. "You're prepared for an early departure, I see." "Yes," Grant confirmed, his expression grave. "Adelaide, there's something I need to tell you before we go." The seriousness of his tone alarmed her. "What is it?" "The men in town, they're looking for me specifically. There was an incident in Texas several months ago. A man died after threatening my sister. These are his associates seeking revenge." Adelaide's hand flew to her throat. "Were they responsible for your sister's death?" "No," Grant said, shaking his head. "Charlotte died of fever after childbirth, but her husband had abandoned her when she was with child, and this man, Silas Blackwell, thought to take advantage of her vulnerability. When I intervened, things escalated." "Did you kill him?" Adelaide asked directly. "It was self-defense," Grant replied, his blue eyes steady on hers. "He drew first in front of witnesses. The Texas Rangers cleared me of any wrongdoing, but his brothers don't recognize the law's judgment." Adelaide absorbed this information, understanding now the urgency of their departure. "And they've tracked you here?" "It seems so," Grant confirmed. "Which means I've inadvertently brought danger to your door by associating with you these past days. For that, I deeply apologize." "You have nothing to apologize for," Adelaide said firmly. "You couldn't have known they would follow you this far." Grant's expression softened slightly. "You're very generous, but the fact remains that your connection to me might put you at risk, at least temporarily. That's why I've made arrangements." "Arrangements?" Adelaide repeated, uncertain. "Mrs. Sullivan has agreed to accompany you to Bisbee today, where you'll stay at the hotel until it's safe to return. The school board has been notified that you're taking a brief leave due to illness." Adelaide felt a flash of indignation. "You've made these decisions without consulting me." "There wasn't time," Grant said apologetically. "And your safety is paramount." "My safety is my responsibility," Adelaide countered, drawing herself up straighter. "I appreciate your concern, truly I do, but I can't abandon my students indefinitely because of a threat that may or may not materialize." Grant's expression grew more serious. "Adelaide, these men are dangerous. They've already connected you to me. If they can't find me, they might attempt to use you to draw me back." "Use me?" The idea seemed absurd. "I'm just a schoolteacher who's known you less than a week." "They don't know that," Grant said quietly. "They saw us together in town, heard we've been dining together at the boarding house. In their minds, that's enough to establish you as someone I care about." The implication hung between them, neither acknowledging directly that there might be truth to the assumption. "Henry, would you give Miss Buchanan and me a moment alone?" Grant asked, turning to his nephew. "Wait by the front door with Mrs. Sullivan, please." Once Henry had gone, Grant stepped closer to Adelaide, close enough that she could see the fatigue in his eyes, evidence of a sleepless night. "I won't leave you unprotected," he said, his voice low and intense. "Not when I'm the reason you're in danger." "And I won't be forced from my home and occupation by threats," Adelaide replied with equal conviction. "I came west knowing there were risks. I've faced them before and I'll face them again." Grant's frustration was evident in the set of his jaw. "This isn't about your courage or capabilities. This is about specific men with a specific vendetta who won't hesitate to harm an innocent woman if it serves their purpose." Adelaide recognized the truth in his assessment, even as she resisted the implications. "What would you have me do? Hide indefinitely? Abandon my life here?" Come with us, Grant said suddenly, to Texas. The proposal stunned her into momentary silence. That's impossible. My contract with the school board can be dissolved in extenuating circumstances, Grant finished for her. I spoke with Mayor Holloway last night. He agrees the situation warrants emergency measures. Adelaide stared at him, thoughts racing. You want me to leave today with you and Henry to Texas? Yes, Grant confirmed, his directness leaving no room for misinterpretation. For your safety initially, but beyond that, he paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. I believe there could be a place for you on my ranch. Henry needs education and my foreman's children as well. We've discussed establishing a small school. Adelaide tried to process the suggestion. You're offering me a teaching position. To start, Grant said, his gaze steady on hers, though I hope in time there might be more between us than a professional arrangement. The candor of his statement took her breath away. Mr. Dawson. Grant, he corrected gently, and I know this is sudden and unconventional. I'm not proposing marriage to a woman I've known less than a week. I'm proposing safety, security, and the opportunity to know each other better in a place where you won't be sleeping on schoolhouse floors or worrying about your next meal. His assessment of her situation was painfully accurate. Adelaide felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. And if after some time we find we're not suited, she asked pragmatically, then I would ensure your safe return to wherever you wish to go with sufficient funds to establish yourself comfortably, Grant replied without hesitation. I'm not offering charity, Adelaide, I'm offering choice, a choice you haven't had since your parents' passing. The word resonated deeply, choice. It was what she'd lost when poverty and circumstance had forced her to the frontier, what she'd struggled to reclaim through her determined self-reliance. When would we leave? She asked, not quite a yes but no longer a firm refusal. Within the hour, Grant said, relief evident in his expression. We'll travel with armed men for protection until we're well away from Copper Creek. Adelaide thought of her small trunk, so quickly packed and unpacked. There was nothing in Copper Creek she would truly miss except her students, and even they would soon have a replacement teacher. I need to gather my belongings, she said finally. Grant's smile was warm, transforming his tense features. I'll help you, we haven't much time. Within 30 minutes, Adelaide's trunk was loaded onto a wagon alongside Grant's and Henry's possessions. Mrs. Sullivan pressed a package of food into her hands, eyes damp with worry and something like approval. He's a good man, the older woman whispered. I've seen enough of the other kind to know the difference. Adelaide hugged her impulsively. Thank you for everything. As they prepared to depart, Grant helped Adelaide into the wagon seat beside Henry, then conferred briefly with his trail boss. 6 armed cowboys would accompany them on the first leg of their journey, with the cattle herd to follow later under the foreman's direction. Just as Grant was about to climb onto the wagon, a shout from the far end of the street caught their attention. 3 men on horseback were approaching rapidly, their intent unmistakable even at a distance. Go, Grant ordered the driver. Get them out of town, I'll follow. Adelaide's protest died in her throat as the wagon lurched forward. She clutched Henry's hand, both of them turning to watch as Grant and 2 of his men faced the approaching riders. The confrontation was brief but violent. Gunshots echoed through the early morning quiet as the wagon rounded a bend in the road, carrying Adelaide and Henry away from the danger. The last thing Adelaide saw was Grant kneeling behind a water trough, revolver drawn. He'll be all right, Henry said with a child's simple faith. Uncle Grant always wins. Adelaide wished she shared his confidence. The 15 minutes that passed before Grant and his men caught up to the wagon were the longest of her life. When he finally appeared, riding hard with blood staining his shirt sleeve, she felt relief so profound it left her lightheaded. Is it over? She asked as he reined in beside the wagon. For now, Grant confirmed, his expression grim. One of them won't be troubling anyone again. The others retreated, but they may regroup. You're wounded, Adelaide said, noticing how he favored his left arm. Just a graze, he assured her. Nothing that won't heal on the trail. They traveled hard that day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and tend to Grant's wound, which was indeed superficial but still concerning to Adelaide. By nightfall they had covered significant distance, and Grant deemed it safe to make camp. As the cowboys established a perimeter and prepared a simple meal, Adelaide found herself sitting beside Grant near the campfire, Henry already asleep in a bedroll nearby. Are you having second thoughts? Grant asked quietly, studying her face in the firelight. Adelaide considered the question honestly. I'm questioning my sanity, she admitted. Yesterday I was a schoolteacher in Copper Creek. Today I'm fleeing gunmen on my way to Texas with a man I've known less than a week. Grant's laugh was low and warm. When you put it that way, it does sound rather impulsive. Completely irrational, Adelaide agreed, though she found herself smiling as well. My mother would be scandalized. And your father. Adelaide thought about it. He might understand, actually. He always said life's greatest adventures never begin with careful planning. A wise man, Grant observed, though I generally prefer careful planning myself. Is that what this is? Adelaide asked, suddenly curious. A carefully planned adventure. Grant's expression grew more serious. No, this is unexpected for both of us, I think. Entirely unexpected, Adelaide confirmed. When you rode into Copper Creek, I was contemplating a return to Philadelphia. Now I'm heading to Texas instead. Life on the frontier rarely follows a predictable path, Grant said, shifting to find a more comfortable position for his injured arm. That's both its challenge and its gift. Adelaide watched the flames dance in the darkness. I've been running from something ever since my parents died, she said softly. The crushing weight of loss, of failure, of not knowing how to exist in a world that suddenly had no place for me. Grant's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. And now I feel like I might be running toward something instead, she admitted, though I'm not entirely certain what that something is. Neither am I, Grant said with surprising candor. I know only that when I realized you were sleeping on that schoolhouse floor, something shifted in me. I couldn't leave you in those circumstances, couldn't bear the thought of you facing such hardship alone. Compassion is not the same as deeper feeling, Adelaide pointed out pragmatically. True, Grant acknowledged, but it's often where deeper feeling begins. They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching the fire and listening to the night sounds of the desert. Adelaide was acutely aware of Grant's hand still holding hers, of the impropriety of their situation, and yet she felt no desire to pull away. We should rest, Grant said eventually. Tomorrow will be another long day of travel. He showed her to a tent that had been set up for her use, a small luxury that touched her deeply. One of my men will be on guard nearby all night, Grant assured her. You're safe here. As Adelaide settled onto her bedroll, exhaustion overtook her anxieties. Her last conscious thought was that for the first time since her parents' deaths, she wasn't facing her struggles alone. The journey to Texas took nearly 2 weeks, each day bringing them deeper into a landscape Adelaide had never seen before. They traveled first through rugged mountains, then across vast stretches of desert, and finally into the rolling grasslands of West Texas. Throughout the journey, Grant remained attentive to her comfort without being overbearing, while Henry's enthusiasm for sharing his knowledge of the territory proved both endearing and educational. By the time they crested the final hill, and Grant pointed out the boundaries of his ranch in the valley below, Adelaide felt she had come to know both of them in ways that would have been impossible in the more formal setting of Copper Creek. That's our home, Grant said, a note of pride in his voice as he indicated a large house nestled among cottonwood trees in the distance. Built by my father 30 years ago, expanded by me after his passing. Adelaide took in the sprawling property, the main house, outbuildings, corrals, and beyond them, vast grasslands dotted with cattle. It was larger and more established than she had imagined, suggesting a prosperity beyond what even Grant's fine clothing and easy confidence had implied. It's beautiful, she said sincerely. So green and alive. Henry bounced excitedly in his saddle. Wait until you see inside. There's a library with more books than the school in Copper Creek, and a piano that nobody can play right because Ma died before she could teach me. Adelaide smiled at his enthusiasm. Perhaps I could help with that. I had piano lessons in Philadelphia. Grant glanced at her with interest. Another hidden talent. You continue to surprise me, Miss Buchanan. As they approached the ranch house, a group of workers emerged to greet them, led by a tall, weathered man who strode directly to Grant with evident relief. About time you got back, he said gruffly, though Adelaide detected genuine affection beneath the rough exterior. Trouble's been brewing with the North Pasture fence line. Jefferson claims we're encroaching on his water rights again. We'll sort it out, Grant replied easily. Sam, this is Miss Adelaide Buchanan. Adelaide, this is Samuel Cooper, my foreman and right hand since my father's time. Sam studied her with undisguised curiosity. Ma'am, welcome to Double D Ranch. Other introductions followed: the cook, Mrs. Espinoza, who immediately took charge of Adelaide's comfort, the housekeeper, Mrs. Wilson, who showed her to a spacious bedroom, and various ranch hands whose names blurred together after the long journey. Adelaide's room was larger than the entire apartment she'd occupied in Philadelphia after her parents' deaths, with a four-poster bed, a washstand with real porcelain basin, a writing desk, and windows that looked out over the grasslands. After 2 weeks on the trail, it seemed impossibly luxurious. Mrs. Wilson, a brisk, efficient woman in her 50s, helped Adelaide unpack her meager belongings, her expression revealing nothing about the pathetic state of Adelaide's wardrobe. "Dinner is served at 6, the housekeeper informed her. "Mr. Dawson takes his meals in the dining room with Henry and any guests. He asked that you join them when you're rested." Left alone, Adelaide sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the rapid changes in her circumstances. 3 weeks ago, she had been sleeping on a schoolhouse floor, certain her frontier experiment had failed. Now she was installed in a grand Texas ranch house, invited to dine with its owner as if she belonged in his world. After washing away the trail dust and changing into her one remaining clean dress, a simple gray cotton that had seen better days, Adelaide made her way downstairs, following the sound of voices to a spacious dining room where Grant and Henry were already seated. Grant rose immediately upon her entrance, his smile warming his blue eyes. "Adelaide, I hope your room is comfortable." "More than comfortable," she assured him. "It's lovely." Henry patted the chair beside him. "Sit by me, Mrs. Espinoza made chicken and dumplings 'cause it's my favorite." Throughout dinner, Adelaide found herself watching Grant, noting the subtle changes in him now that he was home. There was a relaxed authority in his movements, a confidence that came from being in his own domain. He discussed ranch business with Sam, who joined them midway through the meal, his knowledge of cattle and water rights and grazing rotations revealing a depth of expertise she hadn't fully appreciated before. After dinner, as Henry was sent to bed with protests that he wasn't tired, Grant invited Adelaide to join him in the library. "I thought you might like to see the books Henry mentioned," he explained, leading her to a room lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves. "My father was an avid collector, and I've continued the tradition." Adelaide moved through the room in wonder, fingers trailing over leather bindings and gilt titles. "This is remarkable. I've never seen a private collection so extensive." "My father believed that civilization followed books westward," Grant said, watching her explore. "He used to say a ranch needed culture as much as it needed cattle." "A progressive viewpoint for a frontier cattleman," Adelaide observed. "He was an unusual man," Grant acknowledged. "Educated at Harvard before heading west to seek his fortune. My mother was a Boston socialite who followed him despite her family's objections. They built all this together." Adelaide paused at a shelf of Shakespeare's works. "And now it's yours to maintain." "And expand," Grant added, "though I'll admit the cultural aspects have been somewhat neglected since my sister's passing. Charlotte was the musician, the reader, the one who insisted on maintaining connections to the wider world." "Henry has her temperament." "You miss her very much," Adelaide said softly, recognizing the familiar shadow of grief in his eyes. "Every day," Grant confirmed. "She was my only sibling, younger by 6 years. Our parents died of cholera when she was 16 and I was 22. I became her guardian, then watched her marry a man who proved unworthy of her." Adelaide returned to sit in one of the leather armchairs near the fireplace. "And now you're raising her son." "Trying to," Grant said, taking the chair opposite hers, "though I fear I'm better with cattle than children." "Henry seems well-adjusted and happy," Adelaide assured him. "You've provided stability when he needed it most." "I've provided food, shelter, and basic guidance," Grant corrected. "What he needs is education, culture, the influences his mother would have given him. That's why your arrival seems providential." The implication hung between them, neither quite addressing the unusual circumstances that had brought her to Texas. After a moment of silence, Grant leaned forward slightly. "Adelaide, I want to be clear about your position here. You are a guest first and foremost. There are no expectations or obligations." "But you mentioned a teaching role," she reminded him. "For Henry and the ranch children." "If that interests you, yes," Grant confirmed. "But it needn't be decided immediately. I want you to rest, to become familiar with the ranch, to be certain this place suits you before making commitments." His consideration touched her deeply. "That's very generous." It's practical, Grant countered with a slight smile. A reluctant teacher serves no one well. And truthfully, I enjoy your company and would like the opportunity to know you better without the pressures of immediate decisions. The candor of his statement brought a blush to Adelaide's cheeks. That seems sensible. Good, Grant said, rising from his chair. Then it's settled, you'll be our guest for a time and we'll proceed from there. He moved to a cabinet and removed a decanter. Would you care for a small glass of sherry? My father's tradition after dinner. Adelaide accepted the offered glass, their fingers brushing briefly during the exchange. The contact, though fleeting, sent an unexpected warmth through her body. To new beginnings, Grant said, raising his glass. New beginnings, Adelaide echoed, taking a small sip of the sweet liquor. Later that night, lying in the unfamiliar comfort of her new bedroom, Adelaide reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. The woman who had slept on a schoolhouse floor less than a month ago now reclined on a feather mattress in a Texas cattle baron's home. It seemed unreal, like a story from one of the novels in Grant's library. Yet even as she marveled at these changes, a whisper of caution threaded through her thoughts. Her mother had often warned that good fortune could be as dangerous as bad if it fostered dependency. Adelaide had come west seeking independence, not a different form of reliance. I must maintain my own identity here, she whispered to the darkness, whatever happens. With that resolution firmly in mind, she drifted into the deepest sleep she had known in months. The next weeks established a rhythm to life at Double D Ranch. Adelaide gradually assumed responsibility for Henry's education, creating a structured curriculum that incorporated both traditional subjects and practical knowledge of ranch operations. 3 children from neighboring ranches and the foreman's 2 daughters joined these lessons, creating a small but lively classroom in what had once been the ranch's little-used formal parlor. Grant observed these developments with obvious approval, providing books and supplies without hesitation. He joined them occasionally, particularly for history and geography lessons, his own education evident in his thoughtful contributions. Beyond her teaching duties, Adelaide found herself increasingly involved in the life of the ranch. She learned to ride properly under Grant's patient instruction, discovered the satisfaction of helping in the vegetable gardens that supplied the kitchen, and even mastered some basic Spanish phrases to communicate with several of the ranch hands. Most evenings were spent in the library with Grant and Henry, reading aloud, playing chess, or simply talking. These quiet hours became the part of each day Adelaide anticipated most, a time when formality relaxed and genuine connections deepened. It was during one such evening, approximately 6 weeks after her arrival, that Grant raised a subject Adelaide had been carefully avoiding. The autumn social at the county seat is next Saturday, he mentioned casually as they finished a game of chess. Henry had already been sent to bed, leaving them alone in the lamplit library. It's something of a tradition among the ranching families in the area. I thought perhaps you might like to attend. Adelaide looked up from the chessboard, where her queen stood in imminent danger from Grant's bishop. A social gathering. A dance primarily, Grant clarified, with dinner beforehand, rather formal by frontier standards, though nothing like Philadelphia society, I imagine. The prospect filled Adelaide with both anticipation and anxiety. I haven't attended a social function since before my parents died. All the more reason to go, Grant suggested. You've been working hard with the children. An evening of music and conversation would be a welcome change. Adelaide gestured ruefully at her simple dress. I'm afraid I'm not equipped for formal occasions. My wardrobe is rather limited. Ah, Grant said, understanding immediately. That's easily addressed. Mrs. Wilson could accompany you to town tomorrow. There's a dressmaker who could prepare something suitable in time. I couldn't possibly accept such a gift, Adelaide protested. You've already been too generous. Grant's expression grew serious. Adelaide, you've transformed Henry's education and outlook in just a few weeks. You've created a school where none existed, benefiting not just my nephew but several children who had limited opportunities before. If anything, I am in your debt. Before she could formulate a response, Grant continued, his voice softening. Besides, I would very much like to dance with you. Consider it a selfish request on my part. The image his words conjured, being held in his arms, moving together to music, sent a flutter of anticipation through Adelaide's chest. Over the past weeks, her feelings for Grant had evolved from gratitude to genuine affection and something deeper she hesitated to name. In that case, she replied with a small smile, I accept. both the invitation and the offer of assistance with appropriate attire. Grant's answering smile warmed his blue eyes. Excellent, I'll make the arrangements with Mrs. Wilson. He returned his attention to the chessboard. Now I believe your queen is in considerable danger. The trip to town the following day proved both enjoyable and enlightening. Mrs. Wilson, normally reserved and proper, revealed a surprising knowledge of fashion and a definite opinion on what would suit Adelaide best. Green, she declared as they examined fabric samples in the dressmaker's shop. A deep forest green to complement your complexion and bring out the amber highlights in your eyes. Adelaide, overwhelmed by the sudden abundance of choices after months of making do with her meager wardrobe, deferred to the older woman's judgment. The dressmaker took measurements, promised delivery in 5 days, and accepted payment from Mrs. Wilson without mentioning the amount in Adelaide's hearing, a discretion that both relieved and troubled her. As they left the shop, Adelaide broached a subject that had been weighing on her mind. Mrs. Wilson, I'm concerned about the appearance of my situation at the ranch. The housekeeper raised an eyebrow. In what regard, Miss Buchanan? My presence in Mr. Dawson's home, without family or formal employment status. It must seem irregular to the community. Mrs. Wilson's expression softened slightly. Miss Buchanan, frontier society operates by different rules than the East. A single woman teacher boarding with a family of means is neither unusual nor scandalous, particularly when there's a child in need of education. But surely there must be talk, Adelaide pressed. Mr. Dawson is unmarried, after all. There's always talk, Mrs. Wilson acknowledged with a dismissive wave. But Mr. Dawson's reputation is above reproach, and your own conduct has been entirely proper. The establishment of the school for local children has already earned you considerable goodwill among the neighboring families. This assessment eased Adelaide's concerns somewhat, though she remained acutely aware of the unusual nature of her position. She was neither servant nor family, neither guest nor employee in the traditional sense. This ambiguity, while offering a certain freedom, also created a vulnerability she couldn't entirely ignore. The night of the social, Adelaide stood before the mirror in her room, barely recognizing the woman who looked back at her. The green silk dress, with its modestly scooped neckline and fitted bodice, transformed her usual practical appearance into something approaching elegance. Mrs. Wilson had arranged her chestnut hair in a more sophisticated style than Adelaide would have attempted on her own, with soft curls framing her face and a small spray of fresh flowers tucked at one side. A knock at her door announced Mrs. Wilson, who entered carrying a small velvet box. Mr. Dawson asked that I bring you these to complete your ensemble. Inside the box lay a pair of delicate pearl drop earrings and a matching pendant on a fine gold chain. Adelaide gasped at their simple beauty. I couldn't possibly. They belonged to his mother, Mrs. Wilson explained. Mr. Dawson thought they would complement your dress. The significance of the gesture was not lost on Adelaide. These were family pieces, not casual gifts to an employee or temporary guest. She touched one earring gently, uncertain how to respond. If you're uncomfortable wearing them, I can explain to Mr. Dawson, Mrs. Wilson offered, watching her reaction carefully. Adelaide made her decision, lifting the pendant from its velvet nest. No, that won't be necessary. They're lovely, and I'm honored by the loan. With Mrs. Wilson's assistance, she fastened the jewelry in place, the weight of the pendant unfamiliar against her collarbone. The pearls glowed softly against her skin, adding a final touch of refinement to her appearance. Perfect, Mrs. Wilson declared with rare approval. Mr. Dawson is waiting in the library. Adelaide descended the stairs slowly, one hand trailing along the polished banister. Her heart beat rapidly beneath the silk bodice, equal parts excitement and nervousness making her breath come quicker than usual. Grant stood by the library fireplace, his tall figure transformed by formal evening attire. The black suit emphasized his broad shoulders and lean waist, while the crisp white shirt contrasted with his sun-bronzed skin. He turned at the sound of her approach, and the expression that crossed his face, surprise, admiration, and something far more personal, made Adelaide's cheeks warm. You look beautiful, he said simply, moving to meet her at the doorway. Thank you, Adelaide replied, suddenly shy under his appreciative gaze. The pearls are lovely, I'm grateful for the loan. They suit you, Grant said, his eyes lingering on the pendant at her throat. My mother would have approved. The carriage ride to the county seat took nearly an hour, during which Grant pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the region's history. Adelaide found herself relaxing as his familiar voice dispelled her nervousness about the evening ahead. The social was held at the county courthouse, its usually austere chambers transformed by lanterns, autumn flowers, and tables arranged around a cleared space for dancing. As Grant escorted her inside, Adelaide was acutely aware of curious glances from the assembled ranchers and their families. "Most of them have heard about the school you've established," Grant explained quietly as they moved through the crowd. "Your reputation precedes you." Introductions followed in quick succession: the Harrimans, whose daughter attended Adelaide's classes; Judge Patterson and his wife, who administered the county's legal affairs; the Caldwells, whose ranch bordered the Double D to the east. Adelaide struggled to keep names and faces organized in her memory, grateful for Grant's steady presence at her side. Dinner was served at long tables decorated with autumn leaves and candles. Adelaide found herself seated between Grant and Mrs. Caldwell, a lively woman in her 40s who immediately engaged her in conversation about educational methods. "My youngest would benefit enormously from structured schooling," Mrs. Caldwell confided. "He's bright but restless. Might there be room for another student in your classroom?" Adelaide glanced at Grant, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "We would be happy to include him," she assured the other woman. "We currently meet Monday through Friday from 9 until 2. As the meal progressed, Adelaide realized that her presence at Grant's side was being evaluated not as an oddity, but as a potential permanence. The subtle questions about her background, her teaching philosophy, her adjustment to Texas, all carried an undercurrent of assessment, as if the community was determining her suitability for a role she hadn't formally accepted. After dinner, the tables were moved aside and a small band assembled at one end of the room. The first strains of a waltz filled the air, and Grant turned to Adelaide with a slight bow. "May I have the honor?" Years of dancing lessons in Philadelphia returned to Adelaide as Grant's hand settled at her waist, his other hand clasping hers. The initial awkwardness of physical proximity quickly gave way to the pleasure of movement in harmony, Grant's natural grace making him an excellent partner. "You dance very well for a cattleman," Adelaide observed as he guided her through a particularly smooth turn. Grant's eyes crinkled with amusement. "My mother insisted that civilization required certain social graces, regardless of geography. My sister and I had weekly dancing lessons from the time I was 12. "She was a wise woman," Adelaide replied, enjoying the way their bodies moved in tandem. "Though I imagine a 12-year-old boy found little pleasure in such lessons." "On the contrary," Grant said, his voice warm with memory. "It was the only time I was permitted to hold a girl's hand without causing scandal. I became quite enthusiastic once I realized that advantage." Adelaide laughed, the sound drawing glances from nearby couples. "A strategic approach to social education." "I've always believed in finding the practical applications of any skill," Grant agreed, his hand tightening slightly at her waist as they navigated around a less coordinated couple. By the evening's third dance, Adelaide had relaxed completely, enjoying both the music and Grant's company without the self-consciousness that had initially plagued her. When Judge Patterson approached to request a dance, Grant relinquished her with obvious reluctance. "Don't monopolize our new schoolteacher, Dawson," the judge admonished good-naturedly. "Some of us would like to confirm for ourselves that she's as charming as rumor suggests." Adelaide found herself passed from partner to partner for the next several dances, each man offering subtle compliments while assessing her suitability for their community. By the time Grant reclaimed her for a final waltz, she was flushed with exertion and unexpectedly enjoying herself. "You've made quite an impression," Grant observed as they moved once more around the floor. "Mrs. Caldwell is already organizing a fundraising committee for school supplies, and Judge Patterson mentioned something about county funds for teacher salaries." Adelaide looked up in surprise. "Truly. That would be wonderful for the children." "And for their teacher," Grant pointed out. "A county salary would provide you with independent income." The implication was clear. Such an arrangement would shift her status from dependent guest to self-supporting professional, a change that addressed concerns she hadn't voiced directly to Grant but which he had evidently perceived. "You've orchestrated this," she realized, studying his expression. "Merely created opportunities for your abilities to be recognized," Grant countered. "The community needs what you offer, Adelaide." "I'm simply facilitating the connection." The thoughtfulness of his actions touched her deeply. He had understood her need for independence and found a way to support it that honored her dignity rather than undermining it. As the dance ended and they prepared to depart, Adelaide found herself the recipient of warm invitations to visit various ranches and participate in community events. What had begun as an evening of anxiety concluded with a sense of acceptance she hadn't experienced since before her parents' deaths. The carriage ride home was peaceful, the autumn night cool but pleasant. Grant draped a lap robe over their legs against the chill, the casual intimacy of sharing this space seeming natural after the closeness of dancing. "Did you enjoy the evening?" he asked as the carriage rolled through the darkness, stars brilliant overhead. "Very much," Adelaide replied honestly. "Your neighbors are welcoming." "They recognize quality when they encounter it," Grant said, his hand finding hers beneath the lap robe. "As do I." His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and strong, and Adelaide made no move to withdraw. This small connection, hand to hand in the darkness, felt right in a way that defied rational explanation. When they reached the ranch house, Grant helped her from the carriage, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. The house was quiet, the hour late, only a few lamps left burning to guide their return. In the entrance hall, Adelaide turned to bid Grant good night, but found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Adelaide," he said softly, "may I kiss you?" The request, so proper and yet so intimate, sent a flutter of anticipation through her body. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Grant stepped closer, one hand rising to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. His lips met hers in a kiss that began tentatively, a question rather than a demand. Adelaide responded instinctively, her hands coming to rest against his chest as the kiss deepened, becoming a conversation without words. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Grant's blue eyes held hers with unmistakable emotion. "I have been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you in that schoolhouse doorway." Adelaide smiled, her heart racing. "That long?" "At least that long," Grant confirmed, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "Though propriety demanded patience." "Propriety is highly overrated," Adelaide replied with unexpected boldness, rising on tiptoe to press another quick kiss to his lips. Grant's laugh was low and warm. "A dangerous perspective from a schoolteacher." "Perhaps," Adelaide acknowledged as she reluctantly stepped back, "but an honest one, at least in this moment." "Good night, Adelaide," Grant said, releasing her hand with evident reluctance. "Sweet dreams." As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, Adelaide touched her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. Whatever uncertainties remained about her future, one thing was becoming increasingly clear: her feelings for Grant Dawson had evolved far beyond gratitude or professional respect. In her room, as she carefully removed the pearl earrings and pendant, Adelaide caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her seemed different from the desperate schoolteacher who had slept on a classroom floor in Copper Creek, more confident, more alive, her eyes bright with possibilities rather than shadowed by fears. "New beginnings," she whispered, remembering their toast from weeks ago. The words felt more meaningful now, infused with hope and potential she hadn't dared imagine then. The following weeks brought significant changes to Adelaide's position at Double D Ranch. Judge Patterson made good on his promise of county educational funds, officially appointing her as the district teacher with a modest but reliable salary. Mrs. Caldwell's fundraising efforts resulted in new books, slates, and even a small piano for the schoolroom, which Adelaide used to begin Henry's long-delayed music education. With financial independence came a shift in Adelaide's relationship with Grant. No longer his dependent, she could accept his courtship without the complications of obligation. Their evenings in the library took on a more openly romantic quality, with conversations that stretched late into the night and increasingly frequent kisses when Henry had been sent to bed. Yet even as their relationship deepened, shadows from the past occasionally intruded. Grant received word that the remaining Blackwells had been seen in San Antonio, still apparently seeking revenge for their brother's death. Though he assured Adelaide that the threat was minimal given the distance and the Texas Rangers' awareness of the situation, she noticed that he increased security around the ranch and restricted Henry's movements more than usual. 3 months after her arrival in Texas, Adelaide sat in the schoolroom after dismissing her students for the day. The space had been transformed from a formal parlor into a proper classroom, with maps on the walls, a row of desks for the children, and bookshelves filled with educational materials. She was recording the day's progress in her teaching journal when Grant appeared in the doorway. "Working late?" he asked, leaning against the frame with casual grace. Adelaide smiled at the sight of him, "Just finishing some notes." "How was your meeting with the cattle buyers?" Productive, Grant replied, entering the room and perching on the edge of her desk. We agreed on a fair price for the spring herd. The ranch's finances are in excellent shape. I'm glad to hear it, Adelaide said, noting a tension beneath his casual demeanor. Is something else on your mind? Grant studied her face for a moment before responding. You know me too well already. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I received a letter today from the school board in Copper Creek. They're inquiring about your intentions regarding your teaching contract, which apparently was never formally terminated. Adelaide's breath caught. The letter represented a connection to her former life, one she had largely set aside in the excitement of building something new in Texas. I should write to them, she acknowledged. It was remiss of me not to address the matter sooner. Yes, Grant agreed, his expression carefully neutral. They would need to know if you plan to return or if they should seek a permanent replacement. The question hung between them, larger than the specific matter of a teaching contract. Would she stay in Texas with Grant and the life they were beginning to build together, or did part of her still consider Copper Creek or even Philadelphia her real destination? Adelaide set down her pen, turning to face Grant directly. I have no intention of returning to Copper Creek. The tension in Grant's shoulders eased visibly. I'm glad to hear that, but I don't want to assume. He hesitated, then continued with characteristic directness. Adelaide, these past months have been the happiest I can remember since before my sister's death. Having you here, watching you with Henry, seeing how naturally you've become part of ranch life, it's made me realize what's been missing. Adelaide's heart quickened at his words. Grant, please, he said gently, raising a hand. Let me finish while my courage holds. He moved from the desk to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Adelaide Buchanan, I love you. I believe I began falling in love with you the moment you stood in that schoolhouse doorway with your chin raised proudly despite your circumstances. I love your determination, your intelligence, your kindness to Henry, your willingness to adapt to a life so different from what you knew. I want to build a future with you if you'll have me. Adelaide felt tears welling in her eyes as his words washed over her. The emotion that had been growing within her these past months crystallized into certainty. I love you too, she said softly, squeezing his hands. So much that it sometimes frightens me. After losing my parents, I promised myself I wouldn't depend on anyone again, wouldn't risk that kind of devastation. But you've shown me that independence doesn't have to mean isolation, that strength can be found in connection rather than separation. Grant's smile transformed his face, joy replacing the tension that had tightened his features. Does that mean? It means yes, Adelaide interrupted, laughing through her tears. Yes to whatever you're asking, yes to staying, yes to us, yes to building a future together. Grant rose, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. His kiss was different from those they had shared before, deeper, more certain, filled with promise rather than question. Adelaide responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed closer. When they finally separated, both breathless, Grant reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He opened it to reveal a ring of delicate gold filigree, set with a perfect pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was my grandmother's, then my mother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it as my wife. Adelaide extended a trembling hand, watching as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if made for her. It's beautiful, she whispered, tears threatening again. Henry will be ecstatic, Grant said, pulling her close once more. He's been asking when you would become really family instead of just teacher. Adelaide laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. He's a perceptive child. He gets that from his mother, Grant replied, a hint of sadness tempering his happiness. Charlotte would have loved you, I think. She always wanted a sister. I wish I could have known her, Adelaide said sincerely. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of running feet in the hallway. Henry burst into the room, followed more sedately by Mrs. Wilson, who was attempting without success to slow his headlong rush. Did you ask her? Did she say yes? Henry demanded, skidding to a stop before them. His eyes fell on the ring glinting on Adelaide's finger, and his face split into a wide grin. You did, she did. He launched himself at them both, arms wrapping around their waists in an enthusiastic embrace. Adelaide laughed, ruffling his hair affectionately. Were you in on this conspiracy? She asked the boy. Uncle Grant asked my permission first, Henry said proudly. Since you're my teacher and all, I said it was about time.
Mrs.
Wilson, hovering in the doorway, permitted herself a rare smile. Congratulations, both of you. This is happy news indeed. Word spread quickly around the ranch, with cowboys doffing hats respectfully when they encountered Adelaide and Sam Cooper organizing an impromptu celebration in the bunkhouse that evening. Mrs. Espinosa prepared a special dinner, complete with a cake she must have been holding in readiness for this anticipated occasion. As they sat at dinner that night, Grant at the head of the table, Adelaide to his right, and Henry practically bouncing in his chair with excitement, Adelaide was struck by the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate loneliness of Copper Creek to the warm embrace of a family and community that valued her, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. "What are you thinking?" Grant asked quietly, noticing her momentary abstraction. Adelaide smiled, looking from him to Henry and back again. "I was thinking that sometimes, losing everything you thought you needed opens the door to finding what you truly require." Grant reached for her hand, his fingers warm around hers. "And what is it you truly require, Adelaide Buchanan?" She squeezed his hand, her heart full. "This, you, a place to belong, work that matters, and people to love who love me in return." Henry, listening with unusual attention, nodded sagely. "That's what Ma used to say, that home isn't a place, it's people who love you no matter what." "Your mother was very wise," Adelaide told him, throat tight with emotion. Later that evening, after Henry had been persuaded reluctantly to bed, Adelaide and Grant walked together on the wide porch that wrapped around the house. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Texas sky. "When shall we be married?" Grant asked, his arm around her waist as they gazed upward. "Soon," Adelaide replied without hesitation. "I've never been one for long engagements." Grant laughed softly. "Nor I. Though we should probably allow time for the community to attend. Mrs. Caldwell would never forgive us for a hasty ceremony that denied her the pleasure of organizing celebrations." 2 weeks, Adelaide suggested. "That seems a reasonable compromise between haste and propriety." 2 weeks, Grant agreed, pulling her closer against the night's chill. "And then you'll be my wife, and Double D will truly be your home." Adelaide turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had transformed her life in ways she could never have imagined. "It already is my home," she said softly. "You and Henry made it so." Grant's kiss was tender, a promise of the life they would build together. As Adelaide returned his embrace beneath the Texas stars, she felt the last of her doubts and fears dissolving, replaced by certainty that wherever this man was, she had found her place in the world. The wedding preparations consumed the next 2 weeks, with neighbors and ranch hands alike contributing to the celebration. Mrs. Caldwell arrived with fabric samples and dressmakers in tow, determined that the bride should have a gown worthy of the occasion. Judge Patterson offered to perform the ceremony himself, while his wife organized a committee of ranchers' wives to decorate the small church in the county seat. Adelaide found herself swept along by the community's enthusiasm, touched by their wholehearted acceptance of her as Grant's chosen partner. Each gesture of support from Mrs. Espinosa's careful preparation of traditional Mexican wedding cookies to Sam Cooper's unexpected offer to build a new bookshelf for the library as a wedding gift reinforced her sense of belonging. 3 days before the wedding, as Adelaide was trying on her completed gown under Mrs. Wilson's critical eye, a commotion in the ranch yard drew their attention. Moving to the window, Adelaide saw a cloud of dust announcing riders approaching at speed. Grant emerged from the barn to meet them, his stance alert but not alarmed. "Who is it?" Adelaide asked, unable to distinguish faces at this distance. Mrs. Wilson squinted against the sunlight. "Looks like rangers by the badges." "4 of them." A flutter of anxiety rose in Adelaide's chest. The Texas Rangers rarely made social calls, and their appearance so close to the wedding seemed ominous. She quickly removed the white gown, changing back into her everyday dress with Mrs. Wilson's assistance. By the time she reached the main floor of the house, Grant was in the library with the Rangers, their voices carrying through the partially open door. "We received intelligence that they were heading this direction," one man was saying. "Given the history, we thought it prudent to warn you directly." "I appreciate the courtesy," Grant's voice replied, tension evident even in those few words. "How recent is your information?" 2 days. They were seen in Austin asking questions about the Double D Ranch and its location. 3 men well armed. The Blackwell brothers and a hired gun named Jenkins. Adelaide's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. The danger Grant had assured her was distant had suddenly materialized, threatening to disrupt the happiness they had found together. The library door opened fully and Grant noticed her standing in the hallway. His expression softened immediately, though concern remained evident in his eyes. "Adelaide," he said, moving to her side, "come in. These men are Texas Rangers." The Rangers removed their hats respectfully as Adelaide entered the room. Their leader, a weathered man with iron-gray hair and penetrating eyes, nodded in greeting. "Miss Buchanan, Captain Ellison, Texas Rangers. I understand congratulations are in order." "Thank you," Adelaide replied automatically, her attention focused on Grant. "What's happening?" Grant's arm came around her waist, a gesture both protective and reassuring. "The Rangers have brought news that the Blackwell brothers may be headed this way. It's probably nothing more than talk, but we'll take precautions." Captain Ellison's expression suggested the situation might be more serious than Grant was indicating. "We'll maintain a presence in the area for the next week or so, Mr. Dawson. These men have made specific threats that we consider credible." "The wedding," Adelaide began, concern flooding her. "Will proceed exactly as planned," Grant finished firmly. "We won't allow threats to disrupt our lives." After the Rangers departed, promising to return the following day with additional men, Grant led Adelaide to the library sofa, sitting beside her with their hands clasped. "I should have told you they were getting closer," he admitted, regret evident in his voice. "I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily, especially with the wedding preparations." Adelaide squeezed his hands. "I understand. But Grant, if there's real danger—" "There's a potential threat," he corrected gently. "One that's being addressed by competent authorities. The Rangers take such matters seriously, and they'll ensure our safety. And Henry, should he be sent somewhere safer until this is resolved." Grant considered this, his concern for his nephew evident. "Perhaps, though separating him from us might cause more distress than protection. Let me think on it." That evening, after Henry had gone to bed, Grant gathered the ranch's senior hands in the dining room to brief them on the situation. Adelaide sat beside him, determined to understand the full scope of the threat they faced. "The Blackwells blame me for their brother's death," Grant explained to those who weren't familiar with the history. "Despite the fact that he drew on me first, in front of witnesses, and the killing was ruled justified self-defense." "They're not men who respect the law," Sam Cooper added grimly. "I remember them from when they worked seasonal roundups years back, mean drunks quick to take offense." "All the same, they're not fools," Grant continued. "With Rangers in the area and all of you on alert, they'd be risking certain capture or death to attack the ranch directly." "So what are they likely to do?" Adelaide asked, voicing the question foremost in her mind. Grant's expression was guarded. "They might try to catch me away from the ranch, or," he hesitated, glancing at her, "they might attempt to strike at me through those I care about." The implication was clear. Adelaide, as Grant's fiancée, could be a target for men seeking to hurt him. She felt a chill at the realization but refused to show fear. "Then we'll all remain vigilant," she said firmly. "And proceed with our plans." The meeting concluded with assignments for increased patrols around the ranch's perimeter and escorts for anyone traveling to town. As the hands filed out, Grant drew Adelaide into his arms, holding her close as if to physically shield her from harm. "I'm sorry," he murmured against her hair. "This isn't what I wanted for our wedding week." Adelaide leaned into his strength, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Life rarely follows our preferred script. We'll manage this together, just as we'll face whatever else comes our way in the years ahead." His arms tightened around her. "Have I told you lately how remarkable you are, Adelaide Buchanan?" "Not since breakfast," she replied, attempting lightness despite her concern. "I believe you called me extraordinary over the coffee." Grant's laugh rumbled against her cheek. "Clearly I'm growing predictable. I shall have to expand my vocabulary of admiration before you tire of me completely." The next 2 days passed in a state of heightened alertness that gradually became the new normal. Rangers patrolled the area regularly, ranch hands traveled in pairs, and Henry was kept close to the house, much to his vocal frustration. Wedding preparations continued nonetheless, with dressmakers and decorators coming and going under watchful eyes. On the eve of the wedding, Grant arranged for Henry to stay with Judge Patterson and his wife in town, where the church was located. The boy protested initially, but was eventually persuaded by the promise of special responsibilities during the ceremony. After seeing Henry off with a trusted ranch hand as escort, Adelaide retreated to the library, seeking the comfort of familiar surroundings. She found Grant there, standing by the window that overlooked the ranch yard, his expression distant. "Second thoughts?" she asked softly, only half joking. Grant turned, his face softening at the sight of her. "Never about you, only about the timing." He crossed to where she stood, taking her hands in his. "Adelaide, we could postpone the wedding until this situation is resolved. No one would think less of us for it." She shook her head firmly. "I don't want to wait. I don't want to give them that power over us. Even knowing there's risk." "Life is risk," Adelaide replied simply. "I learned that when my parents died, when I came west alone, when I found myself with nowhere to sleep in Copper Creek. Every choice carries uncertainty. What matters is whether the potential reward justifies the gamble." Grant raised her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with reverence. "And does it justify the risk?" Adelaide met his gaze steadily, all her love visible in her eyes. "You, Grant Dawson, are worth any risk. A lifetime with you and Henry is worth facing whatever dangers come our way." His kiss was tender, a physical affirmation of the bond between them. When they separated, Grant rested his forehead against hers, his voice low and intense. "Tomorrow you'll be my wife. No threat, no danger will prevent that." "Tomorrow," Adelaide agreed, her heart full of certainty despite the shadows that hovered at the edges of their happiness. That night, her last as an unmarried woman, Adelaide lay awake longer than usual, her thoughts alternating between joyful anticipation of the ceremony ahead and concern about the Blackwell's threat. Eventually she rose, wrapping a shawl around her nightgown, and moved to the window seat that overlooked the ranch yard. The full moon illuminated the scene below, the barn and outbuildings, the corrals, the bunkhouse where lights still burned despite the late hour. Armed ranch hands patrolled visibly, their silhouettes moving steadily along established routes. Beyond them stretched the vast Texas grasslands, silver under moonlight, seeming to extend forever into the distance. This would be her home, her domain as Grant's wife. The thought filled her with both wonder and determination. Whatever threats emerged, whatever challenges they faced, she would defend this place and the people she loved with every resource at her disposal. With that resolution firm in her mind, Adelaide returned to bed and finally drifted into sleep, her dreams filled with images of the life that awaited her. The wedding day dawned clear and unseasonably warm for early winter. Adelaide woke to find Mrs. Wilson already waiting with a breakfast tray and practical instructions for the day ahead. "Mrs. Caldwell will meet us at the church to help with final preparations," the housekeeper informed her as Adelaide ate. "Mr. Dawson has already departed for town with Captain Ellison and several rangers as escort." The normalcy of these arrangements, despite the undercurrent of security concerns, helped calm Adelaide's nervous anticipation. By the time she was dressed for travel, a sense of resolute joy had replaced her earlier anxieties. The journey to town passed without incident, rangers riding before and behind the carriage that carried Adelaide, Mrs. Wilson, and the carefully packed wedding gown. The church, when they arrived, was already a hive of activity, with women arranging flowers and men setting up extra seating for the substantial crowd expected. Mrs. Caldwell swept Adelaide into a side room that had been prepared for the bride's use, exclaiming over the wedding dress and issuing a stream of instructions to the younger women assisting her. The next hours passed in a blur of preparation, hair being arranged, the gown carefully donned and adjusted, final touches applied under Mrs. Caldwell's critical eye. "There," she said finally, stepping back to assess the result. "You look absolutely radiant, my dear. Grant Dawson is a fortunate man indeed." Adelaide gazed at her reflection in the small mirror provided, hardly recognizing the elegant woman who looked back at her. The wedding gown, with its high lace collar and fitted bodice flowing into a modest train, transformed her usual practical appearance into something approaching grandeur. Her chestnut hair was arranged in an intricate style beneath a veil of delicate lace, while Grant's mother's pearls adorned her ears and throat, complementing the engagement ring on her finger. "Thank you," she said sincerely to Mrs. Caldwell and the others who had contributed to this transformation, "for everything." A knock at the door announced Judge Patterson's wife. "It's nearly time," she said, smiling warmly at Adelaide. "The church is full to overflowing, and your groom is looking both nervous and handsome at the altar." The women filed out, leaving Adelaide alone for a final moment of reflection. She thought of her parents, wishing they could have known Grant and Henry, could have seen the happiness she had found so far from Philadelphia. "I hope you would be proud," she whispered to their memory, Another knock and Mrs. Wilson appeared. "It's time, Miss Buchanan. Are you ready?" Adelaide nodded, gathering her bouquet of winter roses and greenery. More than ready. In the absence of a father to give her away, Adelaide had asked Sam Cooper to escort her down the aisle. The weathered foreman waited at the church entrance, uncharacteristically formal in a black suit and polished boots. "Miss Buchanan," he said, genuine admiration in his voice as he offered his arm. "You're a vision." The church doors opened, and Adelaide's first impression was of light and color. Sunshine streaming through windows, flowers adorning every surface, and the assembled guests rising to their feet as the organ began the wedding march. Her gaze found Grant immediately, standing tall and straight beside the altar, his expression shifting from tension to wonder as he saw her. Henry stood at his uncle's side, beaming with pride in his role as best man. He wore a new suit that matched Grant's, his usual boyish energy temporarily contained by the solemnity of the occasion. Each step down the aisle brought Adelaide closer to her future. She noted familiar faces among the guests, ranch hands, neighbors, the ranger captain and his men positioned strategically throughout the church, but her focus remained on Grant, whose blue eyes never left her face. When she reached him and Sam placed her hand in his, Grant squeezed her fingers gently, a silent communication of all they had weathered to reach this moment. Judge Patterson began the ceremony with traditional words about the sanctity of marriage and the responsibilities it entailed. Adelaide and Grant spoke their vows clearly, their voices steady with conviction as they promised to love, honor, and protect each other through whatever life might bring. As Grant slipped the gold wedding band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, Adelaide felt a sense of completion, of rightness that transcended the circumstances of their meeting and courtship. Whatever strange path had led her from desperate loneliness in Copper Creek to this altar in Texas, she was grateful for every step of the journey. "By the authority vested in me by the state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Patterson declared, his voice carrying to the farthest corners of the church. "You may kiss your bride." Grant lifted Adelaide's veil carefully, his eyes holding hers with such tenderness that she felt tears threatening. His kiss was gentle but thorough, a public affirmation of their private bond that drew approving murmurs and a few good-natured cheers from the assembled guests. As they turned to face their community as husband and wife, Henry stepped forward to hug them both, completing the family circle they had formed. Adelaide bent to embrace him properly, her heart full as his arms wrapped around her neck. "Now you're really my aunt," he whispered, joy evident in his voice. "Forever and ever." "Forever and ever," Adelaide confirmed, brushing a kiss against his cheek before straightening to take Grant's arm for their procession down the aisle. The reception was held in the town hall adjacent to the church, a space transformed by Mrs. Caldwell's committee into an elegant venue for the community celebration. Tables laden with food lined the walls, while the center of the room was cleared for dancing after the wedding dinner. Rangers maintained a visible presence, but their watchfulness was unobtrusive, allowing the festivities to proceed without obvious tension. Adelaide and Grant moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes from neighbors and ranch hands alike. The genuine warmth of the community's response touched Adelaide deeply, reinforcing her sense that she had found not just a husband but a true home among these people. Henry appointed himself their unofficial attendant, hardly leaving their side throughout the celebration. His pride in his new status as nephew to the bride was evident in every introduction he made and every story he shared with guests who inquired about their family. As afternoon transitioned to evening, lanterns were lit and the musicians took their places for the dancing portion of the festivities. Grant led Adelaide to the center of the floor for their first dance as husband and wife, one hand at her waist and the other clasping hers with gentle pressure. "Are you happy, Mrs. Dawson?" he asked quietly as they moved to the music. The new name sent a thrill through Adelaide. "Completely," she assured him, allowing her usual reserve to soften into open adoration. "And you?" "More than I believed possible," Grant replied, his arm tightening slightly around her. "You've brought light back to my life, Adelaide, to Henry's too." Their private moment was interrupted, as tradition dictated that others join the dance. Judge Patterson claimed Adelaide while Mrs. Caldwell partnered with Grant, beginning the pattern of separations and reunions that would characterize the evening's festivities. As darkness fell outside, the celebration continued within the brightly lit hall. Adelaide found herself constantly aware of Grant's location even when they were apart, her gaze seeking him automatically whenever he moved beyond her immediate vicinity. She noted that he maintained the same awareness of her, their eyes meeting across the room in silent communication throughout the evening. It was during one such moment of separation, as Adelaide was speaking with Mrs. Patterson near the refreshment table, that a commotion at the entrance caught her attention. 3 rangers entered quickly, conferring with Captain Ellison in low, urgent tones. The captain's expression darkened as he listened, his hand moving automatically to the weapon at his side. Adelaide excused herself from Mrs. Patterson and moved toward Grant, who was already heading in her direction, alerted by the same disturbance. They met in the center of the dance floor, Grant's arm coming protectively around her waist as Captain Ellison approached them. "Mr. Dawson, Mrs. Dawson," the ranger said quietly, his formality not disguising his concern. "I'm afraid we have a situation. My men have spotted the Blackwells and their associate on the outskirts of town." Grant's body tensed beside Adelaide's. "How many?" "3 as expected. They're armed and appeared to be scouting the area. We believe they may be planning to wait until people leave the reception to make their move." Adelaide felt fear flutter in her chest, not for herself but for Grant and Henry. "What do you recommend, Captain?" The ranger studied her with newfound respect, noting her calm despite the threat. "We'll escort guests home in groups with armed men. You, Mr. Dawson, and the boy should remain here until we've cleared the area and can provide safe passage back to your ranch." Grant nodded his agreement. "Thank you, Captain. We'll follow your guidance." As Ellison moved away to organize the evacuations, Grant turned to Adelaide, his expression grave. "I'm sorry our wedding day has been disrupted this way." Adelaide touched his cheek gently. "The wedding itself was perfect. This is just an unexpected conclusion to the celebration." "An unexpected conclusion indeed," a harsh voice interrupted from behind them. Adelaide turned to see 3 men standing just inside the side entrance to the hall, guns drawn and aimed directly at Grant. The eldest, a heavily bearded man with cold eyes, stepped forward, his weapon unwavering. "Evening, Dawson," he drawled, malice evident in every syllable. "Quite a celebration you're having." "Shame we weren't invited." The music stopped abruptly as guests became aware of the intruders. Women gasped and drew back while men reached instinctively for weapons that, in most cases, had been left at home for the formal occasion. Grant pushed Adelaide slightly behind him, his body a shield between her and the threat. "James Blackwell," he acknowledged coolly, "this is neither the time nor place for whatever grievance you think you have with me." Blackwell's laugh held no humor. "On the contrary, what better time to settle accounts than when a man is distracted by happiness, makes it all the more satisfying to destroy." Captain Ellison and his rangers were working their way cautiously through the crowd, hands on their weapons but not yet drawing in the crowded space where innocent bystanders might be hit. "Put down your weapons, Blackwell," Ellison called firmly. "You're outnumbered and surrounded. There's no way out of this hall except through my men." The second Blackwell brother, younger and leaner than James but with the same cold eyes, gestured with his gun toward the guests. "Plenty of hostages here, Captain. I suggest you and your men back away before someone gets hurt." Adelaide felt a tug at her skirts and looked down to see Henry crouched behind her, fear evident in his young face. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, mind racing for a way to protect him if violence erupted. "This is between you and me, James," Grant said, drawing the gunman's attention back to himself. "Let the guests leave, including my wife and nephew, then we can discuss your grievances like men." James Blackwell's gaze shifted to Adelaide, taking in her wedding gown and the protective way Grant stood before her. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Your wife, well now that changes things. Sela's never got the chance to marry because of you, Dawson. Seems only fair you should lose your bride on your wedding day." He swung his gun toward Adelaide, and several things happened simultaneously. Grant lunged toward Blackwell, Captain Ellison drew and fired from across the room, and Adelaide pulled Henry fully behind her, shielding him with her body as gunshots exploded in the confined space of the hall. Women screamed, men shouted, and through the chaos, Adelaide was aware only of Henry's small body pressed against her back and the desperate need to protect him from harm. She felt rather than saw Grant grappling with Blackwell, heard more gunshots, and then strong hands were pulling her and Henry toward the cover of an overturned table. "Stay down," Sam Cooper ordered, positioning himself between them and the continuing gunfire. "Rangers are handling it." The gunfight seemed to last an eternity but was over within minutes. When the shooting stopped, Adelaide raised her head cautiously to see rangers standing over the bodies of two men while the third, the younger Blackwell brother, was being disarmed and handcuffed, blood streaming from a wound in his shoulder. "Grant," she gasped, searching frantically for her husband among the figures still standing. Relief flooded her as she spotted him conferring with Captain Ellison, apparently unharmed except for a torn jacket sleeve and a cut on his cheek. He looked up at her voice, his expression transforming from grim determination to profound relief as their eyes met across the disrupted hall. In 3 long strides he reached her, pulling both her and Henry into his arms with such force that it momentarily stole her breath. "You're safe," he murmured against her hair, his voice unsteady. "Both of you." "Thank God." Henry clung to them both, his earlier bravado replaced by the natural fear of a child who had witnessed violence. "The bad men are gone?" he asked, voice small against Grant's chest. "Yes," Grant assured him, one hand cradling the back of the boy's head protectively. "The Rangers have handled them. They can't hurt anyone now." Captain Ellison approached them, holstering his weapon. "Mr. Dawson, Mrs. Dawson, the situation is under control. James Blackwell and Jenkins are dead. Matthew Blackwell is wounded but will stand trial for his crimes." Adelaide nodded, still processing the sudden violence that had erupted in the midst of their wedding celebration. "Thank you, Captain, for your quick action." The ranger acknowledged her gratitude with a slight bow. "My men will escort you and your family safely home when you're ready. The threat has been eliminated." As Ellison moved away to organize the remaining guests, Grant drew Adelaide and Henry toward a quiet corner of the hall, away from the bodies being removed by ranger deputies. "Are you truly unharmed?" he asked urgently, his hands gentle as they checked her for injuries. "When I saw him aim at you." "We're fine," Adelaide assured him, though she could feel herself beginning to tremble as shock set in. "Just frightened." Grant pulled her close again, his heartbeat strong and steady against her cheek. "I'm so sorry, Adelaide. This is not how our wedding day should have ended." "No apologies," she said firmly, leaning back to meet his gaze. "You didn't cause this, and we're all safe, that's what matters." Henry looked up at them both, his young face solemn. "Is it always going to be this exciting being a family?" Despite the tension of the moment, Adelaide found herself laughing at the boy's assessment, Grant joining her a moment later. Their shared laughter, born of relief and released fear, seemed to break the spell of danger that had momentarily overshadowed their celebration. "No, Henry," Grant assured him, ruffling his nephew's hair affectionately. "Most days will be considerably less exciting, I promise." An hour later, with rangers before and behind their carriage, the new Dawson family made their way home to the ranch. Henry, exhausted by the day's events, had fallen asleep against Adelaide's side, his head resting trustingly on her shoulder. Grant sat opposite them, his gaze rarely leaving their faces as the carriage rolled through the darkness. "What are you thinking?" Adelaide asked softly, careful not to wake Henry. "That I'm the luckiest man in Texas," Grant replied, his voice equally low. "Despite everything, I have you and Henry safe and whole. Nothing else matters." Adelaide reached across to take his hand, their fingers intertwining in the dimness of the carriage. "We have each other," she corrected gently, "all of us." When they reached the ranch, Grant carried the still sleeping Henry inside, while Adelaide followed with her wedding gown's train draped over one arm. The house was warmly lit and welcoming, Mrs. Wilson and Mrs. Espinosa having prepared it for the newlyweds' return despite the unexpected delay. After settling Henry in his bed, Grant and Adelaide found themselves alone in the upstairs hallway, outside the master bedroom that would now be theirs to share. Despite the day's dangers and the fact that they had known each other for months, Adelaide felt a sudden shyness as Grant opened the door, gesturing for her to precede him. The room had been transformed in their absence. Fresh linens adorned the large four-poster bed, while candles cast a soft, golden light over the polished furniture and colorful rugs. A fire burned low in the fireplace, taking the chill from the winter night air. Grant closed the door behind them, his expression shifting from concern to something warmer as he gazed at Adelaide in her slightly disheveled wedding finery. "You are the most beautiful bride Texas has ever seen," he said softly, moving to stand before her. "Even with gunpowder smudges on your gown." Adelaide glanced down at her dress, noticing for the first time the dark marks left by the chaos in the town hall. "Hardly the pristine bride tradition demands." "I've never had much use for tradition," Grant replied, his hands gentle as they removed the pins securing her veil. "I prefer reality, and the reality is that you showed extraordinary courage today, protecting Henry without thought for your own safety. The veil came away, and Grant's fingers moved to the pins holding her elaborate hairstyle. One by one he removed them, allowing her chestnut locks to fall around her shoulders in waves. I acted on instinct, Adelaide said, her breath catching as his fingers combed through her freed hair. He's a child. Our child now. Yes, Grant agreed, his voice deepening at her words. Our family, something I never expected to find after Charlotte's death. His hands moved to the buttons at the back of her wedding gown, each touch reverent as he helped her out of the formal attire. Adelaide felt her earlier shyness giving way to anticipation, her body responding to his proximity and gentle ministrations. When the gown had been carefully laid aside, Grant stepped back slightly, his gaze traveling over her silk-clad form with undisguised appreciation. My wife, he murmured, the words both a statement and a question. Your wife, Adelaide confirmed, reaching for him with newfound confidence, now and always. Their kiss began gently but quickly deepened, months of restrained desire finding release in the privacy of their bedroom. Grant's hands were sure and knowing as they explored her body through the thin silk of her undergarments, while Adelaide's own touches grew bolder as she familiarized herself with the contours of his muscular frame. When they finally came together as husband and wife, it was with a tenderness that belied the day's violence, a connection that transcended physical pleasure to touch something deeper within them both. In the sanctuary of each other's arms, they found healing for past wounds and promise for the future they would build together. Afterward, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts, Grant's fingers traced idle patterns on Adelaide's bare shoulder. I never expected this, he confessed quietly. When I rode into Copper Creek on ranch business, I had no idea my life was about to change completely. Adelaide smiled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. Nor did I was planning my retreat back east, certain the frontier had defeated me. And now, Grant asked, tilting her chin up to meet her gaze. Now I know that sometimes we find strength in the most unexpected places, Adelaide replied. Including a schoolhouse floor in a mining town. Grant's laugh rumbled beneath her cheek. I still can't believe you were sleeping there, you with all your dignity and determination. Necessity makes strange bedfellows, Adelaide quipped, then blushed at her own choice of words. Though I much prefer my current sleeping arrangements. Grant's arms tightened around her, his expression growing serious. I want you to know something, Adelaide. Whatever comes our way, drought, cattle, disease, economic hardship, you will never be without a home again. I promise you that. The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Adelaide's eyes. I know, she whispered, reaching up to touch his face, and you will never be without the love and support of a family. That's my promise to you. Their lips met in a kiss that sealed these vows more surely than any spoken in the church that day. As sleep claimed them at last, Adelaide's final conscious thought was of gratitude, for the strange, difficult path that had led her west, for the man whose arms held her safe, and for the future they would build together on the Texas frontier. Epilogue 1 year later. Adelaide Dawson stood on the wide porch of the ranch house, watching a summer storm roll across the grasslands. Beside her, Henry practiced his reading aloud, stumbling occasionally over longer words but showing remarkable progress from the uncertain boy she had first met in Copper Creek. That's excellent, Henry, she praised as he finished the passage. Your fluency has improved tremendously. The boy beamed at her approval, closing the book carefully. Ma would be proud, don't you think? Very proud, Adelaide confirmed, ruffling his hair affectionately. As are your uncle and I. The past year had brought many changes to Double D Ranch. The small school Adelaide had started now boasted 12 students from neighboring properties, necessitating an expansion of the classroom space and the hiring of an assistant teacher. The county continued to provide her salary, though Adelaide had insisted on working fewer hours since the birth of her daughter 3 months earlier. As if summoned by her thoughts, Grant appeared in the doorway, their infant cradled against his shoulder. Charlotte is awake and demanding her mother's attention, he said, crossing the porch to place the bundle in Adelaide's waiting arms. The baby, named for Grant's sister, blinked up at Adelaide with eyes that were already showing hints of her father's blue. Her tiny fist wrapped around Adelaide's finger with surprising strength as she nestled into her mother's embrace. She has your determination, Grant observed, smiling at the pair, and your beauty. And your timing, Adelaide countered with a laugh. Always arriving just when things seem most desperate. The reference to their first meeting brought a warm look to Grant's eyes. Best cattle drive of my life, he declared, leaning down to kiss her lightly. Though I still maintain it was your courage, rather than my timing, that truly saved the day. Henry, watching them with the half-embarrassed, half-pleased expression of a child witnessing adult affection, piped up, "Can I hold Charlotte now? I've been practicing with my doll like you showed me." Adelaide carefully transferred the baby to her nephew's waiting arms, supervising the exchange with a mother's watchful eye. Henry had embraced his role as older cousin with enthusiasm, proudly showing Charlotte off to visitors and carefully explaining to her the workings of the ranch she would one day partly inherit. As the boy crooned softly to the infant, Grant's arm came around Adelaide's waist, drawing her against his side. "Happy?" he asked quietly, his breath warm against her ear. Adelaide leaned into his strength, watching the two children who had become the center of their shared world. Beyond them stretched the ranch lands that had flourished under Grant's careful management, supporting not just cattle but now expanded orchards, vegetable gardens, and even beehives that produced honey for the local market. "Completely," she assured him, turning her face up for another kiss. "This life we've built together, it's more than I ever dared hope for." Grant's eyes held hers, the love in them undiminished by a year of marriage. "When you whispered that you had nowhere left that day in Copper Creek," he said softly, "I meant what I said. You have me, Adelaide." "Always." "And you have me," she replied, her heart full to overflowing as they stood together, a family forged in adversity but flourishing in love, watching the summer rain begin to fall on the land they called home.